In a quiet Connecticut neighborhood, firefighters found a man so emaciated he weighed just 68 pounds. He was 32 years old. For 2 decades, his stepmother had kept him prisoner in his own home, a secret buried in plain sight. This is the story of how a child can be erased and what it takes for a broken soul to find a life after being thrown away. His name was withheld, but his case ripped open a dark truth. Children living with a step-parent are 17 times more likely to be killed by them. This story traces one victim's 2-decade journey from a bright, forgotten boy to a ghost in his own home, and the mysterious carpenter who, after a chance encounter, became the only person to look for him. So how did this boy vanish from the world, and who was the man who finally gave him a voice? In the spring of 1994, Daniel was an energetic 10-year-old with a gap-toothed smile, living with his father in a 2-story colonial in a town that prided itself on knowing everyone's business. His mother had passed from a sudden illness 2 years prior, leaving a silence in the house that his father, a long-haul trucker named Robert, tried to fill with longer hours and distant routes. Daniel became what social workers later called a latchkey kid, coming home to an empty house, making his own snacks, and waiting for the sound of his father's rig in the driveway. Changed when Robert met Linda at a truck stop diner just outside Hartford. She was a waitress, 10 years his junior, with a sharp laugh and a way of making him feel seen. 6 months later, they married in a courthouse ceremony. Daniel, then 11, stood as the only witness, holding the ring. At first, Linda was attentive. She packed his lunches, helped with homework, and called him her little man. But the affection was conditional, a performance that faded when Robert was back on the road. The first incident was small, almost deniable. Daniel spilled a glass of milk at dinner. Instead of helping him clean it, Linda grabbed his wrist, her nails digging in. "You're not a baby," she hissed. "Clean it up and go to your room, no supper." When Robert called that night, she told him Daniel had misbehaved and was already asleep. The punishment became the first secret. Then came the accidents. Daniel would trip and bruise his shin. He'd forget to wear his coat in winter and come down with a chill. Linda's story was always ready, her concern in front of teachers and neighbors a flawless mask. The real turning point came in 5th grade. Daniel's teacher, Mrs. Albright, noticed a pattern of bruises and his sudden, anxious silence. She made the mandatory call to the state's Department of Children and Families. 2 social workers visited the home. Linda had prepared Daniel, her hand a vice on his shoulder. "Tell them you're clumsy," she whispered, her smile fixed. "Tell them you fell off your bike, or else." Paralyzed by fear, the boy parroted the lines. The social workers saw a clean house, a concerned stepmother, and a boy who wouldn't meet their eyes. The case was closed as unfounded. Emboldened, Linda's control became absolute. The week after the social workers left, she informed Robert that Daniel was struggling in school, becoming disruptive. She said the stress was too much. She convinced him that homeschooling would be better. In the fall of 1995, at age 11, Daniel was pulled out of public school for good. The paperwork was filed, citing emotional and behavioral needs. The front door, which had been his last connection to the outside world, now became a barrier. His world shrank to a single upstairs bedroom. What began as homeschooling quickly devolved into nothing. His schoolbooks were taken away. The television was removed. The window was nailed shut, a sheet of plywood fixed over it from the outside to block the draft. Linda's regime was one of ritualized deprivation. Meals became sporadic, a bowl of plain oatmeal in the morning, sometimes a slice of bread at night. He was allowed to use the bathroom only at designated times. The rest of the hours were spent in the locked room, a space that grew smaller with each passing year. Robert, home less and less, saw only what Linda showed him, a son who was sickly, depressed, and wanted to be left alone. She masterfully played the exhausted caregiver. "He just sleeps all day, Robert. I'm at my wit's end." Guilt and helplessness drove Robert further onto the road, sending more money home, believing his wife was bearing the burden of his difficult child. The system had already checked the box. The neighbors saw nothing. Daniel had effectively vanished. But then, in 2008, a chance intervention almost broke the cycle. A new mailman, an older man named Carl, noticed that the house never had any signs of a teenage boy. No bike, no basketball hoop, no laughter. One bitterly cold January morning, he saw Linda dragging the trash cans out, wearing a fur-lined coat. Through the briefly opened front door, Carl caught a glimpse of a pale, painfully thin figure in the shadows of the staircase before the door slammed. It haunted him. He called the police non-emergency line. They performed a wellness check. Linda was ready. She met the officers at the door, a picture of exasperated concern. She explained her stepson was severely autistic, prone to self-harm, and terrified of strangers. She showed them the cluttered, quiet house. She did not let them upstairs. "He's finally calm," she pleaded. "If you go up there, it'll set him back months." The officers, untrained in the subtleties of captivity, accepted her story. They left. That night, Daniel's punishment for being seen was 3 days without food. For the next 5 years, the silence deepened. Daniel's body adapted to starvation. His mind retreated into elaborate daydreams. He was 17, then 20, then 25, a man in a child's prison, his growth stunted, his muscles atrophied. His only human contact was the woman who held the key, who brought meager rations and harsh words. The house, meanwhile, appeared perfectly normal. Lawn mowed, bills paid. Linda even joined the neighborhood book club. The cruelty of the situation was its sheer, unremarkable invisibility. This was the stagnant, silent hell that existed until February 17, 2019. On that morning, a spark finally caught. Whether by accident or a desperate subconscious act of defiance, a fire started in Daniel's room. Smoke seeped under the door. As flames began to lick the walls, Linda, in a panic, fled the house, leaving him locked inside. It was the raging smoke, not a person, that finally brought the world crashing back in. Neighbors saw the smoke and called 911. Firefighters arrived to a house with blackened windows and a locked second-floor bedroom. What they would find inside would be beyond their worst training scenarios, and it would set in motion a chain of events that would expose not just one woman's evil, but the chilling architecture of neglect that had allowed it to thrive for 22 years. The firefighter who kicked in the bedroom door would later say he expected to find a trapped animal. What he found was a human skeleton covered in soot, curled in the corner and staring back with eyes that held no hope of rescue. Daniel did not cry out. He did not move. He simply watched as the masked figures in heavy gear moved toward him, their voices muffled by the roaring in his own ears. They lifted him, a bundle of bones weighing less than a child, and carried him down the smoldering staircase into the blinding winter light. It was the first time he had been outside in over 8,000 days. In the ambulance, the paramedic's hands shook as she tried to find a vein. His skin was paper-thin, cold to the touch, stretched over a frame that showed every rib, every knob of his spine. His heart rate was a faint, fluttering bird trapped in a cage. "Talk to me, buddy," the paramedic urged. "What's your name?" Daniel's lips parted, but only a dry, crackling sound emerged. He had forgotten how to use his voice for speech. The first flash of the investigation began right there. The lead fire captain, seeing the locked door from the outside, the plywood over the window, and the state of the patient, radioed ahead to the hospital and called the police. This was not a fire. This was a crime scene. At the hospital, a trauma team was waiting. The head of the emergency department, Dr. Anya Sharma, had 20 years of experience. Nothing prepared her. Daniel's body was covered in pressure sores, old scars, and bruises in various stages of healing. His hair was matted, his teeth loose from malnutrition. His muscle mass was virtually non-existent. When they weighed him, the scale settled at 68 pounds. A healthy man his height should have weighed at least 140. The medical term was severe prolonged starvation with associated organ failure. The human term was torture. While doctors fought to stabilize him, police detained Linda at the scene. She was frantic, but not for Daniel. "He set the fire," she screamed. "He's crazy, I was trying to protect him." Her story began to unravel in minutes. Officers searching the house found the locked bedroom, the bucket that served as a toilet, the absence of any personal effects. Downstairs, they found photo albums with pictures of Daniel carefully cut out of every image after the age of 11. They found financial records showing Robert's steady deposits and Linda's lavish spending on herself, designer clothes, jewelry, vacations she took alone. They found the filed homeschooling paperwork that had never been followed up on. By the end of the day, Linda was under arrest for first-degree assault, unlawful restraint, and risk of injury to a minor. The charge would later be upgraded to kidnapping. The call to Robert, hundreds of miles away on a haul to Ohio, was a brutal piece of theater. The police officer asked if he had a son named Daniel. Yes, Robert said, confused. Is he okay? The officer's next question shattered his world. Sir, when was the last time you physically saw your son? Robert, his truck pulled over on the shoulder, stammered. A few months ago. He's always in his room. He's sick. My wife, she takes care of him. The officer informed him his son was in the ICU, near death from starvation, and his wife was in custody. The sound that came from Robert was not a cry, but a guttural collapse. He abandoned his rig and drove straight through the night, a 12-hour journey of mounting, horrific realization. He arrived at the hospital to find a wall of police and social workers. They would not let him see Daniel immediately. He was a person of interest. Detectives sat him down in a cold conference room. They showed him photos of his son's body. Robert vomited into a trash can. He kept repeating, she said he was sick. She said he wanted to be alone. I sent money. I sent all the money for his care. The detectives were pitiless. You never wondered why he never came out of his room. Never heard his voice. Never saw a doctor's report. Robert had no answers, only a guilt so profound it hollowed him out on the spot. He had been, at best, a profoundly neglectful parent. At worst, an accomplice through willful blindness. Meanwhile, in the ICU, Daniel began the agonizing process of re-entering the world. Refeeding syndrome, a potentially fatal shift in fluids and electrolytes, was the first danger. Dr. Sharma oversaw his care with a ferocious protectiveness. She became his first consistent, kind human contact. She would sit by his bed and read the hospital menu aloud, not for him to choose, but to remind him of the existence of food. French toast, she'd say softly, spaghetti and meatballs. Chocolate pudding. He would stare at the ceiling, unblinking. A forensic psychologist, Dr. Elias Vance, was brought in. His assessment was chilling. Daniel exhibited signs of severe traumatic bonding, Stockholm syndrome, and cognitive delays from profound isolation. He was, in many ways, a 32-year-old with the emotional and experiential world of an 11-year-old. The first breakthrough was small. A kind nurse named Ben, a former carpenter in his 50s, was assigned to Daniel's night shift. Ben didn't ask questions. He would simply work in quiet companionship, adjusting IV lines, checking vitals. One night, he was whittling a small piece of wood into a bird to pass the time. Daniel's eyes, for the first time, tracked the movement. Ben saw the flicker of attention. Slowly, over the next week, without pushing, Ben would leave small, carved objects on the bedside table, a smooth stone, a little horse. He never demanded a response. This silent, patient offering mirrored the rich horseman archetype, a rescuer who provided not just safety, but a gentle reintroduction to humanity. Then a bombshell from the past. A detective, reviewing the old Department of Children and Families file, tracked down the retired teacher, Mrs. Albright. Now in her 70s, she broke down crying when she heard the news. I knew, she whispered. I knew something was wrong. We called. They said they investigated. The detective then found the two social workers from the 1990s investigation. One had left the field, the other was still employed. Their memory of the case was hazy, but the record showed the visit lasted less than 20 minutes. The conclusion, allegations unfounded, no signs of abuse observed. This was not just a failure, it was a death sentence served in slow motion over 22 years. The district attorney, facing a media storm, decided to pursue the maximum charges. But Linda's defense attorney was crafty. He began building a narrative. Linda, he claimed, was an overwhelmed woman caring for a severely mentally ill, violent stepson. She had isolated him for his own safety and the safety of the community. The fire was proof of his volatility. They hinted they would argue Daniel's condition was due to a congenital illness, not starvation. This legal strategy meant Daniel would not just be a victim, he would be put on trial. His entire traumatized psyche would be dissected in public. The DA needed him to testify. Dr. Vance was skeptical. You are asking a man who has not spoken in decades to relive his nightmare in front of strangers and the woman who tortured him. It could break him completely. Yet a change was occurring in Daniel. The consistent care, the patience of Ben the nurse, the gentle persistence of Dr. Sharma were creating fragile new pathways in his mind. 2 months after his rescue, he pointed to the little carved wooden horse. Ben, sitting nearby, said, "Horse." Daniel's mouth moved, a rasp, a whisper of air, then a sound, H-horse. It was his first word in over 20 years. It wasn't a cry of pain. it was identification of a gift. In that moment, the narrative shifted from mere survival to the possibility of a life. This fragile progress collided with the outside world when Robert, consumed by guilt and facing potential neglect charges himself, made a desperate plea. He requested a supervised visit with his son. The hospital and child protection services were vehemently opposed, but Robert was insistent. He wanted to explain. He needed to beg for forgiveness. The stage was set for a confrontation that could either catalyze Daniel's recovery or shatter it completely. As Robert was led into the sterile meeting room, Daniel, now able to sit in a wheelchair, watched the door with the wary eyes of a ghost, seeing a familiar shadow from a past life. He did not know this broken, weeping man was his father. He only knew that men who came into his room had never meant him well. The man who entered the room was a stranger to Daniel. He was sobbing, his hands outstretched, saying a name Daniel hadn't heard in 20 years. Daniel recoiled, pushing his wheelchair backward until it hit the wall. His reaction wasn't fear of a stranger. It was the terror of recognizing the source of all his abandonment. Robert fell to his knees, a wail of grief filling the sterile space. I'm sorry, I didn't know," he choked out. Daniel said nothing. He just stared, his body trembling with a primal understanding. This was the man who had left him there. The supervised visit lasted 3 minutes before Daniel began to hyperventilate. It was a catastrophic failure, but from the ashes of that meeting, something shifted in Robert. His guilt transformed into a ferocious, single-minded purpose. He hired a lawyer and vowed to spend every penny he had to help his son and see Linda imprisoned forever. The legal battle became a war on two fronts. The criminal case against Linda was solidifying, but her defense was digging in, preparing to attack Daniel's credibility. Simultaneously, Robert, with his new attorney, filed a massive civil lawsuit against the stepmother, and shockingly, against the state's Department of Children and Families for gross negligence. This second lawsuit sent shockwaves through the system. It alleged that the state, after being alerted, had a duty to protect Daniel and had failed in such a reckless manner that it amounted to state-sanctioned torture. The lawsuit sought $50 million in damages. For the first time, bureaucrats and social workers who had long since forgotten the case were subpoenaed, their careers and pensions suddenly on the line. As the legal machinery ground forward, Daniel's recovery entered a new phase. He was moved to a specialized long-term rehabilitation facility. His world was no longer a single room, but a series of safe, monitored spaces. Ben, the nurse, in an extraordinary act of kindness, arranged to work per diem shifts at the facility to maintain continuity. He continued his silent companionship, now teaching Daniel simple woodworking in the occupational therapy shop. The first time Daniel sanded a piece of pine until it was smooth, he held it up to the light, feeling its texture for a full 10 minutes. It was an act of creation, not survival. Dr. Vance called these moments islands of competence in a sea of trauma. Then a discovery that made everything worse. A detective, now reviewing Linda's life before she met Robert, made a routine call to her hometown in upstate New York. He spoke to a retired police chief who remembered Linda's family. There was a younger half-brother, the chief said, his voice grave over the phone. Died when he was 14. Official cause was a drowning in a creek behind their house. Always struck me as odd. The kid was a strong swimmer. The detective's blood ran cold. He requested the old case file. The investigation had been cursory. The stepmother at the time, Linda's own mother, had said the boy was prone to wandering off. No autopsy was performed. The case was closed in 3 days. The pattern was horrifying and clear. Linda had not invented her cruelty. She had learned it. She had possibly even witnessed a murder and inherited a blueprint for making children disappear. This revelation transformed the case from one of extreme abuse to a potential serial predation. Prosecutors now wondered if the half-brother's death was the first experiment in her family's playbook of annihilation. The media, which had been covering the story as a local tragedy, now seized on this twist. National headlines screamed, "Stepmother from hell, a family legacy of death." The public pressure on the district attorney to secure a conviction became immense. They needed Daniel to be a perfect victim, which was the one thing he could never be. The pressure boiled over in a pretrial hearing. Linda's defense attorney, leveraging the media frenzy, filed a motion to dismiss, arguing the state's case was based on emotion and speculation rather than hard evidence that Daniel was intentionally starved. He cited the old, closed DCF case as proof that professionals had found no abuse. He argued that Daniel's physical and mental state could be the result of a rare, undiagnosed genetic disorder. It was a cold, brilliant, and monstrous legal tactic. The judge, while denying the motion to dismiss, agreed to order an independent medical evaluation of Daniel by a defense-hired specialist. Daniel would have to be examined by a doctor working for the woman who tortured him. The evaluation was a fresh hell. A stern, unsmiling physician arrived at the rehab facility with a defense attorney in tow. For 2 hours, he poked, prodded, and questioned Daniel, who shut down completely, reverting to mute, catatonic stillness. The doctor's subsequent report was a masterpiece of doubt. It stated that while Daniel was clearly malnourished, the etiology of his condition is complex and may involve significant psychosomatic components. It suggested his isolation could have been a pathological choice, exacerbated by an underlying psychosis. In layman's terms, they were building a case that Daniel was so mentally ill he starved himself, and Linda was merely a caregiver in over her head. This was the "it gets worse" moment. The legal system, designed to find truth, was being weaponized to re-traumatize the victim and rewrite reality. Dr. Sharma and Dr. Vance were apoplectic. They pennied a scathing rebuttal, but the seed of doubt was now officially planted in the court record. The DA's team knew their case was in jeopardy. A jury might see a sickly, mentally unstable man and a weeping, concerned stepmother and feel uncertainty. They needed a silver bullet. They found it in the most mundane of places, the financial records. A forensic accountant, digging through years of bank statements, found a series of small, regular cash withdrawals Linda had made every month. $50, sometimes $100. The dates corresponded with grocery shopping trips, but the accountant cross-referenced the totals. If she was buying food for 2 people, even frugally, the math didn't add up. The withdrawal amounts were only enough for one. Then he found the clincher: security camera footage, subpoenaed from a local convenience store from 2 years prior. It showed Linda, clear as day, buying a single pre-made sandwich, a bag of chips, and a large soda. 1 meal, 1 drink. She then drove to a pharmacy and used her cash rewards points earned from buying groceries, to purchase expensive anti-aging cream. The prosecutor had her. This wasn't a story of a struggling caregiver. This was a calculated, financial decision to starve a human being while rewarding herself with the leftovers. It proved intent. Armed with this, the DA offered Linda a plea deal: 30 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 25, in exchange for a guilty plea to aggravated assault and unlawful restraint. They would drop the kidnapping charge. It was a compromise, but it guaranteed a conviction without putting Daniel through a trial. Linda, facing the new financial evidence and the terrifying prospect of the half-brother's death being re-examined, took the deal. When Robert and the DA told Daniel the news, he was in the woodshop, sanding the edges of a small box. He listened, his hands still working. "She's going to prison," Robert said, tears in his eyes again, "for a long time." Daniel put down the sandpaper. He looked at his father, then at Ben, then out the window at a tree swaying in the wind. He did not smile. He simply nodded once, a slow, heavy acknowledgement. The monster was being caged. But for Daniel, the real trial was just beginning. The trial of building a life from nothing, in a world that had already written him off as dead, and in a body that would forever bear the scars of its long starvation. The fight for justice was over. Now began the infinitely more difficult fight for a future. With Linda sentenced and locked away, the world expected Daniel's story to fade into a footnote of true crime. Instead, in the quiet of his rehabilitation, he began the most radical act of his life. He chose to live, not just survive. His days were no longer defined by a lock on a door, but by a series of small, deliberate choices. He chose to get out of bed. He chose to eat the full portion of breakfast. He chose to walk, with a walker at first, then with a cane, down the hallway to the sunroom where Ben had set up a small workbench. The paralysis of trauma began to thaw under the consistent warmth of routine and safety. His relationship with his father evolved in fits and starts. Robert sold the old house, the proceeds going into a trust for Daniel's care. He rented a small apartment near the rehab facility and visited every day, not to talk, but to simply be present. He would read the newspaper aloud or work on a crossword. At first, Daniel ignored him. Then, one afternoon, Robert was struggling with a 7-letter word for resilience. From his chair by the window, without looking up from the birdhouse he was sanding, Daniel whispered, "Endure." Robert's pen froze. It was the first word he had ever spoken to his father. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a fact. And for Robert, it was a beginning. The civil lawsuit against the Department of Children and Families was settled out of court for a confidential sum, rumored to be in the millions. The state did not admit wrongdoing, but the settlement was a tacit acknowledgement of catastrophic failure. More importantly, it funded something unprecedented, a lifetime of wraparound care for Daniel, tailored to his unique needs. It also triggered an internal audit. The investigation found that the social workers who had closed the original case had violated several protocols, including failing to interview the child alone and accepting the stepmother's explanations at face value. Both were fired. The case became mandatory training for new social workers, a chilling example of how a system designed to protect can become a tool of invisibility. Daniel's physical recovery was a marathon. His bones, weakened by decades of malnutrition, were prone to fractures. His digestive system could only handle small, simple meals. He would never be fully healthy, but his mind began to flourish in its new freedom. With the help of a specialized speech therapist, his vocabulary grew from single words to sentences. He developed a dry, observant wit. He loved documentaries about nature, especially birds. Ben, tapping into this, taught him to carve them. Owls, sparrows, eagles emerged from blocks of pine under Daniel's careful, scarred hands. The act of creation was a powerful counter-narrative to the destruction he had endured. 5 years after his rescue, Daniel, now 37, moved into a small, adapted cottage on a piece of land Robert had bought. It had a garden, a workshop, and no locks on the inside of the bedroom door. Ben, by then retired from nursing, became his official caregiver and friend, moving into a guest house on the property. Their bond was the heart of Daniel's new world. Robert lived nearby, and they established a cautious, respectful relationship. They never spoke of the lost years. They spoke of the weather, the garden, the news. It was a peace, fragile and hard one. Then Daniel did something that stunned everyone. He decided to use a portion of his settlement to start a non-profit. He called it the Unseen Foundation. Its mission was to provide resources and advocacy for adult victims of long-term, hidden abuse, a population that often falls through the cracks of child and adult protective services. He hired Dr. Vance as a consultant. At the foundation's launch, a local reporter asked Daniel why he would want to revisit such pain. Daniel, who still spoke softly and with effort, looked at the small, carved bird he always kept in his pocket. "Because I was unseen," he said, "but I learned to see. Now I want to look for others." The foundation's first major campaign was to lobby for Daniel's law legislation that would require cross-referencing homeschooling records with welfare checks and mandate in-person, private interviews for any child subject to a second abuse complaint. It faced opposition from homeschooling advocacy groups and budget hawks, but the raw power of Daniel's story gave it momentum. He never testified in person, but he wrote a statement that was read before the state legislature. It ended with, "You cannot protect what you refuse to see. I was a ghost in your system. Do not make more ghosts." The final surprise came not from a courtroom, but from a mailbox. Years after Linda's imprisonment, Daniel received a letter. It was from a woman in Indiana. She wrote that she was Linda's half-sister from their mother's first marriage. She had seen Daniel's story on the news and had been carrying a secret for 40 years. She claimed that the drowning death of their brother was no accident. She said she had witnessed their mother, in a fit of rage, hold the boy underwater. Linda, then a teenager, had watched from the shore and said nothing. The woman had been too scared to come forward then. She included a faded photograph of the three of them as children, a happy image that now felt like a lie. She wrote, "I am sorry my silence made room for her to hurt you too." Daniel showed the letter to Dr. Vance and the local prosecutor. The statute of limitations had long expired, and the mother was dead. The letter changed no legal outcomes. But for Daniel, it was a piece of a puzzle falling into place. The evil was not an anomaly, it was an inheritance, and he had broken the chain. Today, Daniel is in his late 30s. He tends his garden, which is full of hardy, resilient plants that thrive in poor soil. He carves birds that are sold at a local craft market, with proceeds going to his foundation. He has a rescue dog, a greyhound named Ghost. He has dinner with his father every Sunday. He is not healed in the sense of being unscarred. He is rebuilt. His life is a testament to the terrifying truth that a person can be broken down to almost nothing and still choose to build something beautiful from the pieces. The house where he was imprisoned was demolished by the city. The land was sold. The new owners planted a grove of oak trees. If you walk there now, you hear leaves, not silence. The legacy of the case is twofold: a law that might save others, and a man who, against every odd, learned to live not in the shadow of his past, but in the light of a future he built with his own hands. His story answers the central question posed at the beginning: how does a soul survive being thrown away? The answer is not found in a single heroic rescue, but in the daily, quiet choice to be seen, to connect, and to grow again. Daniel's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. His ordeal was not a freak occurrence, but the extreme endpoint of a spectrum of neglect that touches hundreds of thousands of children every single year. The evil stepmother is an archetype because she represents a terrifying reality. The people entrusted with a child's safety are sometimes the greatest source of danger. The system designed to catch them is often strained, underfunded, and prone to fatal errors of assumption. Daniel survived 2 decades not because the system worked, but because it broke down in every conceivable way. The statistics we cited at the beginning are not just numbers, they are shadows of other stories. The 17 times greater risk of fatal assault, the 400,000 reported incidents of abuse in foster care annually, the 5 children who die every day in America from abuse and neglect. Daniel became one of the visible ones. For every case that makes the news, there are countless others that unfold in silence, in plain sight, in the quiet houses on ordinary streets where no one thinks to look twice. The rich horseman in this story was not one person, but a succession of them. The firefighter who carried him out, Dr. Sharma who fought for his body, Ben who taught his hands to create, and even his father who, in his flawed and desperate way, finally chose to stay. Redemption, the narrative shows us, is rarely a single dramatic rescue. It is a chain of small, consistent acts of humanity that rebuild a world. Daniel's foundation, the unseen, now works to forge those chains for others. So what is the lingering question his life leaves us with? It is this: who is invisible in your world? The quiet child at the school who never has a parent at events, the neighbor you never see. The story we've told today is a stark reminder that communities are not just collections of houses, but webs of responsibility. The most profound protections are often not laws, but the courage to notice, the willingness to ask a second question, and the resolve to not look away. Daniel's garden, growing in once barren soil, is the perfect metaphor. Life can take root in the most unlikely places, but only if someone is willing to tend it. His legacy is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and a permanent indictment against the complacency that allows darkness to thrive. If this exploration of a life remade from ashes resonated with you, if it challenged how you see the world just outside your door, then consider subscribing. We dedicate ourselves to bringing you more documentaries that dive deep into the forgotten corners of the human experience, stories of survival, resilience, and the quiet battles that shape our world. Your subscription ensures these crucial narratives continue to be told. Thank you for watching.